Hey guys, tonight's story kicks off with a snore so loud it actually shakes the candlesticks. There's a royal slipper floating around in a bowl of soup, and a bed that takes 5 servants, and a couple of goats, just to fluff it properly. You've just woken up inside a medieval palace, the ceiling's leaking, of course. Someone is praying, very loudly, in Latin just 2 doors down, and the king is busy arguing with his astrologer about the safest hour to take a nap. Nobody can seem to agree on anything. Someone hands you a mug filled with something hot that smells a lot like regret and boiled thyme. You're not quite sure if it's morning or night or maybe just Tuesday. Welcome to a world where sleep is a political minefield, something deeply suspicious, and every now and then it happens inside a closet. But before you get too comfortable, could you take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just rolled out? It really does help the little guys like me push through the algorithm. And please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Also, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's oddly comforting to know who else is drifting off with us from all around the world. Now get comfortable, just let the day melt away and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up in a bed that crunches. Not in that gentle, cozy way that makes you think of warm straw and rustic charm, but in that awkward, alarming way that suggests coins are shifting around underneath your spine, and something might be whispering prayers directly into your kidneys. You shift just once and are immediately met with the unmistakable crinkle of parchment and the faint scent of lavender that has long since given up. The mattress wheezes, kind of like an old priest on a cold stairwell. Somewhere beneath you, you're almost certain a small copper relic just made eye contact with your spleen. A servant is standing nearby, fanning you with what appears to be a full goose. Not a fan made of feathers, not some tasteful plume, but an entire goose, very much alive and looking mildly offended. Its eyes track your every single movement, as if it's trying to decide whether you're food or royalty or just someone who accidentally stepped on its cousin once. You sit up, slowly, cautiously, as the bed groans beneath you like it's been through some things it will never, ever talk about. The frame is carved from some dark wood that was probably sacred before it was turned into furniture. There are intricate symbols etched all along the headboard. You have to squint to make them out. One of them looks like a bishop juggling fish. Another one might be a bear wearing a crown, or maybe just a very fluffy monk. The more you stare, the less certain you are that any of this is purely decorative. The room itself is vast, with ceilings way too high for comfort and curtains thick enough to count as structural support. A tapestry hangs crookedly over the hearth, depicting what could be a battle, or maybe just a very tense family picnic. The fire crackles away, even though it's summer and the room is already warmer than you're emotionally prepared for. The scent of honeyed wine lingers in the air, mixing with incense and something sharp, like boiled onions and indecision. A footman, wearing a hat that's taller than his own sense of self, announces that breakfast will be served in 2 yawns. You nod solemnly as if you actually understand the unit of time being used here. He bows so deeply his hat nearly takes out a candle, and then he backs out of the room, tripping only slightly over a golden chamber pot that nobody acknowledges. You swing your legs off the bed and immediately step on a small pile of what you really hope is ceremonial confetti and not another sad attempt at insulation. The floor is cold stone, polished to a shine that seems to mock you with every step you take. Your robes, which were left folded on a nearby stool, appear to have been scented with something vaguely herbal and definitively disapproving. A maid enters carrying a fresh towel and a bucket of water that's steaming in a way that suggests this is supposed to be refreshing, not scalding. She sets it down, curtsies, and then whispers, "Mind the mattress. It bites if you bounce too quickly," then leaves, before you can even ask if that was meant to be literal or just a metaphor. You go back to the bed, driven by sheer curiosity now. You lift a corner of the blanket, expecting to see straw or maybe some wool. Instead, you find layers, actual layers, and each one is stuffed with a different ingredient. One is soft and perfumed, another is stiff and alarmingly moist. A third one has coins sewn directly into the quilting, as though someone thought your back pain could be soothed by a firm reminder of the national currency. Tucked just beneath the fourth layer is a small pamphlet titled Moral Conduct in Dreaming, which is printed in Latin and very clearly stained with blood. The pillow is shaped like a rectangle but has the texture of old cheese. It smells faintly of sage and long-held disappointment. You poke it once and it sighs. You decide not to ask any questions. Outside the window, the sound of horses stomping and someone screaming about jam echoes through the courtyard. A bell rings somewhere high above you. The goose hisses. The door creaks open again and a steward in full formal regalia, meaning he's wearing twice as many buttons as any man should, enters holding a scroll. He unrolls it dramatically, revealing your schedule for the day. It reads, 1 ceremonial yawn, 2 contemplative sighs, breakfast with the royal cousins, and a nap evaluation that needs to be completed before sunset. Your sleep quality will be rated by His Majesty's Committee of Somnolent Advisors, he says. Please record any dreams you may have had involving foxes, feathers, or sin. You just nod, wondering if that dream you had about the jellyfish counts. He doesn't wait for you to clarify. Once he's gone, you sit back down on the bed. The mattress lets out a suspicious squelch. The goose just eyes you. You start thinking about your own bed back at home. Simple, flat, unscented, and very unlikely to contain any political commentary. But here, in this room, where even the fire seems to be judging you, your rest is nothing less than an act of diplomacy. You shift just slightly to the left, and a tiny voice from under the blanket mutters something about penance. You freeze. The mattress crunches again, coins shifting, paper rustling, dreams praying underneath you like a bunch of saints who overslept. You lie back down, you close your eyes, you try not to bounce. You're sitting in a chair that's technically a throne, but it's only for consultation purposes. It's a little too short, a little too damp, and it definitely smells like someone once ate a pear here and never apologized for it. Around you, the Royal Nap Council is assembling, each member shuffling in with the slow, ceremonial pace of people who truly believe that time itself is watching them. You've been invited only as an observer, which is really just a polite way of them saying they expect you to stay quiet and maybe hold a candle if things get overly dramatic. The physician enters first, robed in layers of grey linen and pessimism. He's carrying a pouch of herbs and a book that might as well be titled A Brief History of Mucus. He clears his throat, which sounds like 2 frogs arguing, and immediately launches into a monologue about humours. Not the funny kind, the body kind. He talks about yellow bile, black bile, something about warm spleens. He concludes that the king's nap should happen precisely 1 hour after his second bowel movement, or during the hour of intestinal grace, whichever comes first. The astrologer follows him in, draped in stars, or at least in very shiny buttons. He smells faintly of wax and poorly hidden anxiety. He unfurls a chart the size of a mainsail and starts explaining how Mercury's little quarrel with Saturn is indicating a very troubling napping window. The moon, apparently, is being petty. Venus is napping too, and it would be just rude to overlap. He recommends a 15-minute rest at dawn facing northeast, surrounded by 3 unripe apples and absolute, total silence. Everyone nods as if this makes perfect sense. The bishop is the last one to enter, late on purpose. He carries a scroll, a candle stub, and the weary look of a man who hasn't slept properly since the last coronation. His voice is low and reverent as he insists the king's nap must be preceded by confession, 5 blessings, and a hymn sung backward by someone who was recently widowed. It's not about sleep, he reminds the room. It's about humility. The astrologer rolls his eyes so hard you can actually hear it. The 4th advisor is already in the room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, feeding crumbs to a beetle. No one knows his real title, but everyone just calls him the goose strategist. Years ago, he reportedly beat a goose at chess during a diplomatic summit, and ever since, he's been invited to all state matters that involve patience or poultry. He doesn't speak very often, but when he does, everyone listens with that same mixture of fear and fascination that's usually reserved for thunder and very large wheels of cheese. He clears his throat. The beetle pauses. He says quite plainly that the king should nap when he is tired. There is a silence, a deep, profound, spiritual kind of silence. The bishop makes a small choking sound. The physician clutches his herb pouch like it might try to flee. The astrologer looks down at the stars on his sleeve as if they've personally betrayed him. The council immediately erupts into a loud argument. The physician accuses the astrologer of promoting chaos. The astrologer accuses the bishop of fear-mongering. The bishop accuses the beetle of witchcraft. Someone starts banging a spoon against a lute to call for order. The air grows thick with incense and passive aggression. You are handed a scroll and asked to document the session. The scroll is already covered in someone else's scribbles, which are mostly diagrams of noses. You start writing anyway, not really sure what counts as important. The phrase ritual yawning comes up at least twice. So does blanket authority. Nobody laughs. An hour later, the king arrives. He looks tired in that unique way only kings can. Too many rings, too many layers, too many decisions about whether dreams count as political statements. He listens to the council with a face that looks like old bread. When they finally finish, he just nods, thanks them all solemnly, then turns to you and asks where the sun is. You point vaguely toward a window. He lies down on a nearby bench, sighs once, and falls asleep almost immediately. The council just looks stunned. The bishop crosses himself. The astrologer scribbles a quick note. The goose strategist smiles faintly and offers the beetle another crumb. The meeting is adjourned. The nap, it seems, has begun without anyone's permission. At sundown, they start to arrive. One by one, then in pairs, sometimes in little clusters, like pigeons, pretending not to be organized. They don't knock. They don't speak. They enter the king's chamber, like it's a stage, and the performance is always exactly the same. The Sleepening, Act 24. You're seated on a low stool by the fire, supposedly as an observer, though no one seems quite sure who invited you or if you're even part of the ritual. You're holding a ceramic mug of something hot and questionably herbal. It smells like fennel and a mild sense of guilt. The first 2 people through the door wear identical expressions and very different shoes. They approach the bed without a moment's hesitation, lifting the sheets with the solemnity of men unveiling a relic, or perhaps a mistake. One of them pats the mattress gently as if he's comforting it after a long day. The other one just mutters, "Still damp?" before disappearing back into the hallway to find newer, less disappointing linen. Nobody acknowledges this. The king, who is reclining in a chair nearby, sighs but doesn't open his eyes. A third person enters, strumming a lute that has 3 strings and no sense of urgency. Her voice is breathy, like someone singing directly into a bowl of porridge. The song is about sleep, or maybe birds, or perhaps it's a metaphor about moral cleanliness. It's really hard to tell. She sways gently as she plays, her eyes closed, completely unaware that her cloak is slowly catching fire from the hearth. You point. A maid scurries over and bats the flame out with a pillow, all without breaking eye contact with the king. Next come the prayers. 3 clergy members in muted tones, each one representing a slightly different angle on divine approval. One whispers in Latin, one hums a dissonant chord, and the third one simply nods at the ceiling as if God owes him money. They kneel, they chant, and they make strange shapes in the air with their fingers. It's either sacred geometry or an elaborate shadow puppet show about geese. The bishop from earlier stands in the doorway, watching but not participating. He's holding a spoon. No one asks why, and then, inevitably, the bell arrives. It's carried by a boy no older than 9. The bell is large, dented, and smells faintly of fear. He walks in a circle, ringing it 3 times in each corner of the room. This, according to tradition, is meant to frighten away bad dreams, wandering spirits, and anyone who still believes in a rational bedtime. The king doesn't even flinch. He simply raises one hand, and the boy vanishes as swiftly as he came, dragging the bell behind him like an old grievance. Now the room is dim. The fire has settled down into a sullen glow. The bed, freshly reassembled with proper linens and a cedar-scented bolster, stands ready like a very polite threat. 2 footmen approach, one carrying a tray of steaming water for the royal feet, the other holding a small glass vial labelled Night Thoughts Mild. The king declines the vial with a grunt, but accepts the foot bath with the tragic grace of someone who's used to being pampered, but is never surprised by it. You watch as a woman you've never seen before approaches the bed with a single feather and dabs it along the edge of the mattress. You assume it's some kind of ceremony. She winks at you, then leaves. Nobody reacts. You don't ask. At last the king rises. He's already in his sleep robe, which is lined with fox fur and embroidered with something that might be poetry or just a list of cheeses. He doesn't speak. He merely climbs into bed, the covers pulled back by 2 people wearing gloves and matching expressions of humble anticipation. Once he's in place, the blanket is drawn up to his chin with the kind of precision usually reserved for folding maps or concealing a scandal. A scribe steps forward, records the exact moment of the tucking in, and retreats without a single word. The final visitor is a woman who walks the perimeter of the room, dropping rose petals and muttering something about destiny. She places 1 petal on the king's forehead, another on his foot, and a third on the windowsill. Then she blows out a single candle. Darkness seeps into the room like an obedient dog. The door closes. You just sit by the hearth, which is now barely warm, holding your mug of herbal uncertainty, and you watch as the king's breathing evens out into the soft, rhythmic grumble of a man sleeping under the weight of history, responsibility, and at least 6 layers of aggressively monogrammed bedding. Somewhere in the hallway the bell rings one more time, just in case. You're standing at the edge of the royal bed, just staring at it like it's just asked you a riddle and offered you a fish. It looms there in the center of the chamber, plump and silent, a mountain of velvet, feather, and things that probably shouldn't be included in furniture. Someone has folded the sheets with military-grade precision. There's a single sprig of rosemary on the pillow, as if the bed itself might get hungry in the middle of a nap. The chambermaid beside you is small and wrapped in so many layers of wool she could easily be mistaken for a pile of laundry. She leans in close, her breath smelling faintly of mint and ominous folklore. "Moan once for good," she whispers, "twice for less good, 3 times if you feel spiritually uneasy." You just nod, and she steps back as though you've just been marked for something solemn, or maybe flammable. This is your job for the night, official bed tester to His Majesty. It sounds noble until you realize it mostly just involves lying down and trying not to die. You're not allowed to speak, not even a whisper. The king believes that voices leave echoes in the linens. And echoes, he claims, steal dreams. The court debated this once and came to the conclusion that he might be right, mostly because nobody wanted to be the one to test that theory in front of him. You take off your shoes, which are already damp, possibly from the weather, or possibly because the corridor leading to this chamber had suspiciously squishy tiles. You climb onto the mattress, careful not to disturb the rose petals that are still scattered from last night's petal ritual. They crunch faintly under your elbow. The mattress sighs. You lie down very slowly, trying not to bounce, though it's difficult because the bed has layers. It's not just one surface, it's strata. It's like a mattress sandwich with fillings that range from plush down to something that might be hay, or just the idea of hay. Beneath you, something shifts. It could be a spring, it could be a mouse, so you wriggle just a little bit, nothing aggressive, just a mild, exploratory wiggle. You shift over to the left and land on something that's round and firm. You shift to the right and discover the whisper of a prayer that's been stitched into the sheet with silver thread. The pillow cradles your head like it's not sure whether you deserve comfort or a confrontation. The maid coughs gently. You realize you haven't moaned yet. You let out one sound, soft and low, trying to keep it as neutral as possible. The bed is fine, possibly. Probably. You wait. She tilts her head. Was that one or two? She mouths at you. You moan again, this time once, very deliberately. She nods, pulls out a scroll, and scribbles something down with a quill the size of your forearm. Then something beneath you shifts again. You freeze. It's subtle, like a breath or a threat. You roll slightly and you feel it, a lump. It's firm, oblong, and disturbingly warm. You press on it gently. It makes a noise. It's not a human noise, not quite, but it's not human either. You glance over at the maid. She just raises an eyebrow. You moan twice. She frowns. Lump, she mouths. You nod. She writes lump on the scroll, then underlines it twice. Then she steps back a little further toward the door. You shift again. The lump seems to move with you, as if it's reluctant to let you go. You moan a third time, slowly, with feeling. The chambermaid gasps. She drops the quill. 3 moans. She sprints from the room. You are now completely alone in the royal bed. With the lump, you lie there very still, hoping that maybe if you don't move, neither will it. But it pulses. Not in a monstrous way, just in a way that suggests it has opinions. You try to get up, but the blankets are much heavier than you expected, like they've absorbed all the secrets of every royal nightmare and are now reluctant to release them. The candlelight flickers. The room creaks. Somewhere outside, the bell rings once. You moan a 4th time, just instinctively. Too late. The lump shifts again. And then everything goes still. The king's first sleep begins as a sigh, a slow exhale of velvet and ceremony, tucked beneath layers of ritual and goose-feathered certainty. The room dims around him, not from any magic, but from sheer deference, as if even the torches know better than to burn too brightly in the presence of a man about to nap under divine sanction. You sit by the brazier, watching the flame as it seems to roll its eyes. 15 minutes in, he wakes up. No one speaks. The attendants all rush in like a stage crew in the middle of a show change. A towel is brought, slightly damp but warm. A basin appears, filled with water, infused with rosemary and crushed anxieties. The king washes his hands like he's trying to remove a memory, then his face, like it owes him something. He dries himself with a cloth that's embroidered with an image of himself sleeping. You're not sure if that's supposed to be ambition or a prophecy. A servant approaches with a small silver tray. A single radish sits in the center, glistening with dew, or perhaps anticipation. The king eats it whole, chewing very slowly. The crunch echoes through the chamber with the solemnity of thunder in a cathedral. Then comes the prayer. The chaplain arrives, half asleep, his robes on backward, muttering a blessing that was clearly meant for chickens. He corrects himself mid-sentence, turns his stole around, and begins again. The king bows his head. The room holds its breath. You just stare up at the ceiling, which is painted with stars arranged in supposedly blessed constellations that seem oddly judgmental. After that, it's time for the second sleep. He lies down again, this time with a lot less ceremony. Just a nod, a brief grunt, and a rearrangement of his limbs that suggests he's currently negotiating with the bed. You're handed a small bell and told to ring it if he starts levitating. Nobody bothers to explain why that's even a possibility. He dozes off. This time it's deeper. His breathing changes, slows down. A wrinkle in his brow smooths out. You think he might actually be dreaming, although whether it's of peace, or ducks, or a tactical error in the battle of Slightly Moist Hill, you really can't say. His fingers twitch, his foot jerks once. A whisper escapes his lips. Bertram! Before he falls silent again. There is no one in the room named Bertram. You shift in your chair and try not to make any noise. Your foot bumps the leg of a table and a spoon falls off with a clatter that sounds like an entire kingdom collapsing. Every head turns toward you. You freeze. The king stirs, frowns, then mutters something about bread. A steward makes a note. 23 minutes pass. He wakes up again, this time with a sense of purpose. He sits up, his eyes wide but unfocused, like someone searching for meaning in a dream they're still partly inside. He points at the window. Too much blue, he says, even though it's night and completely black outside. A servant just nods, draws the curtain, and says, "Of course, Your Majesty." He stands up. Another basin appears. This one has floating thyme leaves, and what you're almost certain is a pearl. He doesn't wash this time. He just stares into it like it might confess something to him. Someone hands him a tiny book titled Acceptable Thoughts. He flips through 3 pages, closes it, and whispers, "No." It's taken away. Then there's silence. He stands by the bed, his eyes closed, swaying slightly. A candle flickers near his elbow, unnoticed. You wonder if this is the moment right before the third sleep, or if you're witnessing some kind of royal malfunction. A page tiptoes forward with a blanket. The king takes it, wraps it around himself like a disappointed shepherd, and lies back down. No words, no ritual, just gravity and weariness. The third sleep begins. This one is the longest. His face relaxes completely. His breathing softens into the kind of rhythm that makes you feel like you're intruding on something private, ancient, and vaguely agricultural. He murmurs something halfway between a command and a lullaby. You catch the word ducks, and nothing more. You settle back into your chair, the little bell still in your hand, and wonder when you're going to be allowed to sleep, probably after the 4th radish. You're holding what might be pajamas, or possibly a punishment from a fabric sorcerer. The sleeves are long enough to touch your knees, the buttons are made of actual pearls, and the collar has lace so stiff it could probably be used in fencing. A tag stitched into the back reads in very neat script, "For dreams of state and occasional hauntings." You're not quite sure if it's a joke or a warning. The wardrobe stands open behind you, a monolith of cedar and soft, groaning hinges, revealing a nighttime collection that would put most operas to shame. There are silks embroidered with prayers, robes dyed in colours that no longer exist, and a onesie made entirely of chainmail. Everything smells faintly of lavender and ambition. The king is standing beside you, barefoot, but otherwise already wearing most of his ceremonial sleeping gear. Over his linen undershirt he has on a breastplate, polished and inscribed with the names of several moderately successful ancestors. His gauntlets clink faintly as he lifts a goblet of warm, spiced milk. The bishop is watching approvingly from the corner, nodding every time the armor squeaks. "They come in dreams," he murmurs, "more to the shadows than to you. The envy spirits, the slumber thieves, they slip through the cracks of sleep and steal legacy. The queen, who is reclining on a fainting couch shaped like a lion that has clearly given up, just rolls her eyes and fans herself with a slipper. He just doesn't like feeling vulnerable, she says. Says if he dies in a dream, he wants to die standing. The cook appears, breathless, holding 2 thick wooden planks. "Reinforcements," he mutters, already crawling underneath the bed. The last time he wore the greaves, the mattress gave up and the floor asked for mercy. You try slipping into the royal sleepwear designated for guests of minimal importance but significant curiosity. The sleeves start to itch immediately. The wool is coarse as if it resents being touched, and you're almost certain the seams are whispering. A row of pearl buttons runs from your neck to your navel, impossibly close together, each one needing a specific angle and probably a prayer to fasten. You manage to fasten 3 and then just give up. The pants are even worse, tight in all the wrong places and loose in a way that feels accusatory. The chambermaid helps you, her fingers deft and utterly indifferent to your personal dignity. "This pair belonged to the last taster," she says, then clarifies, "of dreams, not food." Though honestly, same difference. You thank her. She does not respond. The king adjusts his gorget and asks if the pillows have been blessed yet. The bishop hurries forward, muttering something in Latin while sprinkling water from a flask labelled mostly holy. A monk wearing a nightcap rings a small bell and scatters dried rose hips across the bed, declaring them emotionally fortifying. The queen pretends to be asleep through all of it, but she peeks through one eye. The king finally climbs into bed, clanking like a knight who's lost his horse and his sense of proportion. The sheets groan. The mattress sighs with the weight of both duty and steel. He lies flat on his back, his arms crossed over his chest like he's expecting judgment. "Sleep is a battlefield," he says softly. You, still itchy and mildly panicked, lie down on a much smaller cot nearby. It's filled with straw or possibly shredded tax records. The wool of your pajamas begins to bunch up in strange places, forming small mountains of discomfort. You shift. A pearl button presses directly into your sternum like it's trying to ask you a question. The candle dims. The bishop withdraws. The queen finally sighs and removes her tiara, placing it in a bowl of salt to keep the dreams light. Somewhere outside, a nightbird calls out. The king responds with a low hum, as if he's challenging it to a duel. You stare up at the ceiling and wonder what it says about a man who feels safest when he's wrapped in metal while unconscious. Maybe it's about control, or prophecy. Or maybe he just likes the way it rattles when he breathes. You scratch at the wool and try not to think about the fact that the pearl buttons are said to represent the tears of the last dynasty and that only 2 were ever removed. You lie still, your eyes open in the dark, pretending to sleep in a way that feels increasingly like performance art. The cot creaks beneath you every single time you shift, so you've just stopped shifting. Your left leg is completely numb. Your right leg is suspicious of the blanket. Somewhere above you, the king is breathing like a man who's negotiating terms with a ghost. The door doesn't creak, it exhales. A servant enters, slippered and silent, carrying a brass tray with a single candle, flickering on it like it knows something you don't. He places the tray on a small table near the king's bed, carefully uncorking a bottle of wine with the slow reverence of someone who's been scolded about it before. He pauses, sniffs the air, then disappears back into the shadows again. The candle stays. Moments later, another one arrives. This one's smaller and wearing a cap that's shaped vaguely like a piece of fruit. She adjusts a pillow with such exaggerated delicacy that it feels theatrical, like she's being judged on her form. She fluffs it 3 times, presses it once, then steps back and whispers something toward the headboard. No one answers her, but that doesn't seem to stop her. The whispering continues. You're not sure who they're talking to or why, but it seems to spread. They're whispering to the coals in the fire, whispering to the curtains, whispering into the lock of a cabinet that hasn't been opened in 37 years, but still receives nightly updates about the state of the kingdom. A third servant arrives, looks around, sighs deeply, and then places a single sprig of mint in the king's shoe. No one stops him. You suspect no one even knows why they do it anymore. You close your eyes briefly, hoping to signal that you're passive. It does not help. A hand touches your shoulder. You jolt slightly, but stay silent. The hand retreats, satisfied. You hear the rustle of parchment and realize someone is leaving notes by the bed, not on the bedstand, but on the bed itself, slipped under the edge of the pillow like fragile, dangerous secrets. You see one of them catch the light. It says, "He knows." Another one follows it. It says, "Maybe bacon." The king murmurs in his sleep. His lips are moving. You hear something that sounds like traitor, but it could also be truffle. The room seems to shift just a little. The candle flares. A servant crouches by the window and mutters a report into the hinges. Another kneels beside the bed and rebuttons a button that wasn't even undone. A spoon clinks faintly in a bowl that was not there 5 minutes ago. Someone's humming now. It's soft and tuneless, but oddly familiar. You think it's the same melody the Queen was whistling earlier in the day while she was arranging her wigs by mood. The tune winds its way through the room, and for a moment everything seems to synchronize. The fire crackles in rhythm, the king exhales on beat. A moth flutters past your face in time with the harmony, and then vanishes, as if it's ashamed of being noticed. You hear the bishop's voice from just outside the door. It's a low chant, not quite Latin, not quite meaning anything. The servants bow their heads for 3 seconds, then go back to whispering. One is now dusting the corner of a tapestry you're pretty sure depicts a war that no one won. Another is rearranging the arrangement of fruit on a plate so the pears look less dominant. You try to sit up. A servant immediately places a cup of water near your hand without even looking at you. The cup is warm and slightly salty. You do not ask why, the king mumbles again. This time it's louder. "Beware the hound," he says. Or possibly, "Where's the ham?" 2 servants nod solemnly. One of them leaves the room with a sense of urgency. The other one tucks the blanket tighter around the king's knees like they hold the truth. The candle flickers again, throwing long, uncertain shadows across the wall. And for a brief moment, you see a reflection of yourself that looks even more tired than you feel. You lie back down, your eyes open, as the room breathes. The servants whisper, and the night goes on just as it always does, too quiet to trust, and too loud to sleep. You're staring at a candle stub that's melting onto a plate shaped like a miniature knight's shield when the bell chimes. It's not a loud bell, but a hesitant one. A bell that feels unsure of its own authority, but it rings all the same, and everyone in the room freezes like they've just been caught plotting something poorly. The king opens one eye, slowly, dramatically. It's the kind of eye-opening that has clearly been rehearsed in mirrors. He does not blink. His fingers twitch, then go still. The bishop rises from his seat near the foot of the bed and clears his throat with the ceremonial severity of someone who is about to say something both nonsensical and legally binding. "It is now 3 minutes to curfew," he says. "Position yourselves." Servants just materialize from pockets in the room you hadn't even noticed before. One of them rolls out a carpet that seems to be exactly the same as the floor that's beneath it. Another one lights a taper, extinguishes it, then lights it again for symbolic reasons. The Queen looks up from her embroidery. Today it's a depiction of a fox being chased by its debts, and she raises an eyebrow. "Don't they usually wait until it's at least 1 minute?" she murmurs. The bishop pretends not to hear her. You remain on your cot, unsure if standing up is respectful or punishable. A chamberlain hands you a horn, not to blow, just to hold, apparently. You grip it awkwardly as a page counts down the seconds with the gravitas of someone who's defusing a very slow bomb.
5, 4, 3. The room inhales. 2, 1. Now. The king sits bolt upright. His eyes are wide, his hair is perfect, and his knight armor gleams faintly in the candlelight. He stares at nothing, or maybe at everything, as if he's waiting for applause. He gets it. Every single person in the room claps precisely 3 times. No more, no less. It's polite, synchronized, and haunting. The king does not move, he just stays upright, his hands on his knees, breathing in a way that suggests he's read far too many dramatic poems about storms.
A servant adjusts the curtain, even though it's already closed. Another one removes a single grape from a bowl and eats it as though it were evidence. This is the bed curfew, a sacred time that's bracketed by the moon's angle, the tides of invisible rivers, and the direction the stable master's cat happened to glance during supper. Earlier, someone sneezed near the chapel, which apparently bumped the window by 17 minutes and required a whole recalculation using beads, chalk, and a lot of emotional guesswork. You asked once, just once, if maybe the king could sleep a bit longer if he felt like it. A monk dropped a plate. A jester wept. The queen just patted your hand and whispered, "We tried that once. There was a drought." Now the king speaks. "Have the bells tolled thrice?" he asks. The bishop bows. "Once fully, once partially, and once in spirit, your majesty." "Then I am risen," the king intones. No one points out that he was already risen, or that he'd only been asleep for what might generously be called a nap with aspirations. The royal chronologer steps forward and records the moment on a scroll made of pressed duckweed. The queen returns to her embroidery, now adding a very small crown to the fox. The room begins to exhale. Someone brings a tray of warm milk for everyone except you, which feels both intentional and wise. The king finally shifts, allowing his spine to settle into a shape that's a little less heroic. A page removes one of his gloves with a pair of tongs. The bishop begins humming. You glance over at the window. The moon is almost sideways, if that's a thing moons can be, and it's casting an accusatory light across the chamber floor. Another servant closes the curtain again, just in case. The king lies back down. "Begin phase 2, he murmurs. You don't know what phase 1 was. You suspect no one does, but everyone just nods. A candle is extinguished with a kiss. A flute plays a single note. Someone whispers something about taxes. The king closes his eyes again, and this time no one claps. You're shown to the Queen's sleeping tower at dusk, just as the wind decides to pick up its pace and begin slapping the ivy in small, repetitive tantrums. The stairs curve in a way that feels passive-aggressive, and by the time you reach the top, your knees are writing letters to your shins in protest. The chambermaid, with her soft voice and steel-like judgment, opens the door with just 2 fingers and a sigh. The Queen's bedchamber smells like honey, mothballs and secrets, though not in equal measure. She's not there yet, but the air itself knows she's coming. Everything is too arranged, too precise. The pillows are fluffed just so, the drapes are tied back with ribbons that look suspiciously like rebranded battle sashes. On the far side of the room, a window glows from the moonlight that's being filtered through an obsidian lens, because apparently even the moon has to be curated here. The bed is a generous shape, wider than it is long, and it's positioned at a sharp diagonal in the center of the room, like it's in the middle of a debate with the floorboards. The sheets shimmer faintly, either from the embroidery or because they've been whispered to. There are 5 blankets, each one representing a different emotion, though no one will tell you which is which. You assume the scratchy one is grief. The Queen enters, not so much walking as declaring her presence through her posture alone. She carries herself like she's always on the verge of giving a monologue. Her hair is braided with dried mint leaves. Her robe is crimson and heavy, and it trails slightly behind her as though it too is exhausted by court politics. She doesn't acknowledge you, but you feel deeply acknowledged all the same. Her attendants float in behind her like a group of polite shadows. One lights a candle, another unlaces her boots. A third one presents a silver bowl filled with what can only be described as aggressively golden honey wine. She swishes, gargles, and then makes a noise that sounds like betrayal, with vowels. She spits delicately into a second bowl that's shaped like a duck, and then whispers a name into her pillow. The name is Edmund, you do not ask. She flops into bed the way a swan might if it had been drinking, and had very strong opinions about inheritance laws. She adjusts the pillow once, then again, then she throws it on the floor and selects another one, smaller and angrier looking. She curses into it softly. It sounds heartfelt. A servant bows. Will Her Majesty be requiring the lullaby tonight? The Queen snorts. If I wanted to be lied to, I'd attend council. No one laughs, but several people smile in ways that suggest they will be bringing this up in the kitchens later. She stretches out diagonally, perfectly bisecting the bed like she's trying to prove a theorem. A monk enters and adjusts the moon chart on the wall, noting the position of Taurus and whether or not the stars have been acting suspicious lately. Someone opens the window just a crack, lets in a breeze, then closes it again immediately. The ritual is satisfied. A single bell chimes. The Queen closes her eyes. Someone extinguishes the main candle with a feather. The silence is immediate, but it's not empty. The chambermaid leans toward you and whispers, "It's romantic." You just nod. You do not understand. From somewhere far below, you can faintly hear the king sneeze. The Queen opens one eye. "Too much cinnamon," she murmurs, and then finally she sleeps. Morning begins not with sunlight, but with a clearing of the throat, an ancient, theatrical kind of throat clearing. It's long and musical, like someone tuning a cello that's made entirely of irritation. You're sitting in the corner of the king's chamber, trying your best to look like a piece of old furniture, when the dream interpreter enters. He does not knock, he drifts. His beard is an entire ecosystem. Tiny feathers are nested within it, some dyed, some still twitching. He wears a robe the color of unease and smells faintly of cloves and the kind of incense you light when you want to feel important. He doesn't introduce himself, he just assumes you know who he is. Everyone here assumes you know things. The king is propped up by 2 velvet wedges and the lingering weight of inherited mystery. He blinks slowly and reaches for his goblet, which is filled with something that may have once been wine, but now resembles the memory of juice. He drinks, swishes, and sighs. "I dreamt of a goat," he announces. The interpreter bows at the waist, a movement so smooth it seems completely detached from his bones. "Flying or hovering?" he asks. The king squints. "Flying, definitely wings. bat-like. Also, it wore a crown. Murmurs ripple through the servants who are lining the wall. You count 6 scribes, each one furiously documenting different aspects of this moment: the temperature, the angle of the king's knees, the goat's wingspan. One of them is drawing the goat. You think she's added tiny boots. The interpreter strokes his beard, and a feather floats down to the floor like a verdict. And what was the goat doing? Hovering above a field. Then it sneezed, and a village caught fire. There's a pause. Which village? The interpreter asks, already opening a scroll. Hard to say. There were turnips. The interpreter's eyes widen just slightly. He pulls another scroll from his sleeve, unfolds it with reverence, and reveals a chart that looks like someone tried to play chess with a thunderstorm. He hums, he points, and he draws a small goat in the margins. And after the fire, the king leans back, his eyes distant. Someone shouted about taxes. Then I was naked and trying to explain civic responsibility to a trout. The interpreter gasps, not loudly, but with intent. A classic symbol of renewal, he whispers. He turns to the bishop, who just nods without any comprehension. Then, solemnly, the interpreter speaks. This is a dream of peace. You blink. No one else blinks. The king nods, relieved. The scribes all write peace in 6 different scripts. One servant begins preparing a celebratory toast. Another brings a goosefeather quill and signs something that looks suspiciously like a declaration of optimism. You just sit there quietly and replay the dream in your head. Flying goat, tax rebellion, flaming turnips, naked diplomacy, peace. The interpreter now places both of his hands on the king's chest, just above his heart, and mutters something in a language that seems to be mostly made of sighs. Then he reaches into a pouch and sprinkles a handful of dried rosemary over the blanket. The king doesn't flinch. He just watches it fall like rain in a dream he hasn't had yet. The goat, the interpreter adds softly, chooses the dreamer. The king beams. You're not sure what that means, but the entire room reacts as though he's just won a siege or pronounced the wheat taxes forgiven. The queen's interpreter, who has been lurking by the door in a quieter, more judgmental robe, just scoffs and vanishes down the hallway in a huff of lavender and competitive symbolism. The king yawns. The dream has been interpreted. The day may now proceed. As everyone begins to shuffle out, you linger. The interpreter brushes past you, and you catch the edge of another feather that's lodged behind his ear. It's small and grey, and possibly from a bird that never existed. He looks at you, just once, briefly. You dream too loudly, he says. Then he's gone. The silence is enforced with the kind of intensity that's usually reserved for revolutions and royal marriages. You've been told politely and ominously twice that noise after midnight is forbidden in this wing of the castle. Not discouraged, not frowned upon, forbidden. As if sound itself becomes treasonous once the sun has had enough. The clock in the hallway chimes once, faintly, then explodes into a mechanical cough before giving up altogether.
Midnight. Immediately the torches are dimmed to a whisper, and every candle is snuffed out with the care of someone closing the eyes of a dying friend. The mood completely shifts. People start to walk slower. Even the dust seems to float more cautiously. You're on your cot, which is technically just a glorified bench with ambitions, trying to balance your legs under a blanket that's made of decorative disappointment. The bed creaks like it's confessing something every time you shift. You try not to breathe with too much enthusiasm. You fail. Outside, a frog croaks loudly, passionately, possibly in defiance of the rules.
From the shadows, a servant appears and gently shakes a rattle that's wrapped in velvet. A soft warning, they call it. The frog either stops or dies. You're not really sure. You'd feel bad about it, but the frog definitely started it. You roll onto your side. The cot lets out a groan that sounds like an old man remembering a bad investment. Instantly, a curtain flutters and a woman you've never seen before materializes right beside you. Her shoes make no sound. Her expression suggests this is not the first groan she's had to punish tonight. Stillness is the kingdom's lullaby, she whispers, pressing a single finger to your lips and then vanishing again, like a fever dream, with good posture. You blink. In the hallway, an owl hoots, then hoots again, louder, like it's correcting itself. Rude, someone mutters. There's a brief scuffle. Feathers drift by the window. The owl does not hoot again. Then comes the fart. Not dramatic, not defiant, just consistent. It's coming from the direction of the chapel, and it has a rhythm like someone attempting to send Morse code with very poor judgment. You hold your breath and wait for the inevitable. Sure enough, 2 monks in sleep robes emerge, one of them holding a brass bowl, the other ringing it in slow, sorrowful chimes. The bowl is for penance. The sound is for shame. No one speaks of the farter. Everyone knows who it is. You close your eyes and try to surrender to sleep, but your cot has different plans. It shifts under you like it's remembering old battles. You hear a creak, then another one. You freeze. A servant pokes their head through the door. Their expression is neutral, but their presence is aggressive. Is it the cot or the soul that stirs? They ask. You don't answer. They nod and leave a pine cone beside your bed. You have no idea what it means. A distant chicken sneezes, probably by accident, but possibly for political reasons. Someone in the next room coughs and then immediately follows it with an apology. The air feels tense. Even the shadows look nervous. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, pipes groan from centuries of poor planning. You wonder if the king hears it from his gilded mattress, or if someone simply lies beneath his bed all night, ready to absorb the noise into their body like some kind of noble sponge of silence. You turn your head slowly, cautiously. The pillow lets out the faintest wheeze. Your door opens. 2 servants enter with a vial of scented oil and a bell made of glass. "Forgiveness," one of them says. "Correction," the other one adds. They dab the oil on your forehead and place the bell on your chest. It's cold, very cold. You lie still and try to appear deeply unconscious. Eventually the room empties again. The wind rattles the shutters once, twice, then seems to remember the rules and backs off. You breathe shallowly like someone who's pretending not to cry during a toast. The frogs do not return. The owl has either repented or been relocated. The farter miraculously has found peace. You close your eyes, the cot sighs beneath you, and this time no one comes. You are awoken by the sound of royal discomfort. It's a specific kind of groaning, less "I stubbed my toe," and more "I have made a decision that will alter the fate of the kingdom and also my spine." The king is missing from his usual perch of 24 embroidered pillows and an aggressively overstuffed mattress that moans like a cursed opera singer every time someone sits on it. You find him outside, on the ground, wrapped in what appears to be a flour sack and nestled in some straw like a chicken that's lost its way in life. "Perspective," he mumbles, his face half buried in the hay. The royal physician is pacing nearby with the urgency of someone who believes a sneeze could change the course of history. The bishop has already fainted into a bowl of porridge. One advisor is just staring up at the sky like it has betrayed him personally. Another is simply writing, "This is how empires fall," over and over again on a parchment scroll. The queen throws a spoon, not at anyone, just into the void. It's for balance, she mutters, before storming off to go gargle some honey wine and plot. You inch a little closer to the king, who looks surprisingly pleased with himself, in the way only a man can be after sleeping in a barn that he technically owns. There's hay in his beard. His nightcap is askew and looks more like a dunce hat than usual. He waves a hand slowly, like he's blessing a harvest. "Do you feel all right, Your Majesty?" someone asks. He blinks slowly, then smiles. "I have discovered truth," he says. There is a long pause where no one is quite sure if this is a good thing or a bad thing. He stretches, or at least he attempts to. His back pops like a small fire. A servant winces. Another one offers him a damp cloth and tells a story about a noble who once tried something similar and was never heard from again. "It was humbling," the king continues, now attempting to rise from the straw, with the assistance of a broom and a peasant named Ulrich, who just happened to be walking past at the wrong time. No bed curtains, no hot stones, no choir of monks humming the psalms of drowsiness, he says. Just earth, honest, scratchy, bitey earth. Bitey? The bishop asks faintly, regaining consciousness just in time for the worst part. Yes, the king replies, casually scratching his leg with a look of enlightened misery. It appears I have been blessed with the company of nature. He holds up a flea between two of his fingers. It bows, probably. The queen returns, now armed with a goblet and an opinion. "You slept in a barn," she says. "You're not enlightened. You're itchy." He just shrugs. "I understand my people now," he says. "I understand suffering. I understand... hay." He sneezes violently. The royal astrologer, who has arrived late, but very dramatically, begins charting the sneeze on a vellum scroll. "This may align with Mars," he says, as if that will help anyone. Later, back in the castle, servants scrub him down with mint and vinegar, while a line of physicians inspects him for any rustic diseases. He just hums, still wearing the flour sack, which he now refuses to return because it speaks to his soul. You are handed a small box of salve and asked to apply it liberally. He winces, then sighs. "I was brave," he says. "You were itchy," you reply. "Both can be true," he murmurs. The next night he returns to his proper bed, 15 mattresses tall and fluffed by people who actually went to school for it. But now he insists on having a single piece of straw tucked under his pillow. "For grounding," he says, "for humility." You think he's probably forgotten what humility even is, but you tuck the straw in for him anyway. And he sleeps like a man who's sure he's changed forever, even if he still snores like a drunken bell tower. You're handed a goblet that smells like it's been steeped in medieval disappointments. A thick, moss-coloured liquid sloshes around inside as thick as guilt and just slightly warmer than body temperature. The sleep physician, who insists on being called Somnalius the Gentle, watches you with the reverence of someone who's unveiling a masterpiece, or maybe a crime. "For dreamless rest," he intones, swirling his own cup with the flair of a magician who's a little too confident. Balanced with valerian, soot of lavender root, and just a whisper of eel bile, a subtle note of anise for the bold. You glance into the goblet, and the goblet seems to stare back at you. Somewhere deep inside it, something bubbles unprompted. You're assured this is both normal and therapeutic. The servant standing next to you dry heaves silently into a napkin. You take a sip. It tastes like betrayal. Not the emotional kind, the root kind. Dirt, boiled socks, and something vaguely like cinnamon, if cinnamon had been left in a drawer for too long and had developed opinions. The king sips his calmly, seated on a throne that's made entirely of pillows, his robes draped around him like a plush onion. His version has a cinnamon stick and a lemon slice floating on top. like someone tried to apologize with garnish. He smacks his lips and nods. Soothing, he says, his eyes already getting glassy. You do not feel soothed. You feel watched, specifically by the chamber pot in the corner, which seems to have shifted 3 inches closer to you while you weren't looking. You blink. It doesn't move, but its handle now resembles a judgmental eyebrow, and you're certain it just sighed. You look away. Somnolius claps his hands and begins humming in E minor, claiming the frequency enhances absorption. A monk appears with a gong. The gong is silent. The monk is not. He chants something about the spine being a river and dreams being boats or goats. You're not sure. The words are sticky and they keep clinging to your forehead. You try to lie down. The bed feels like it's made of moss and poor decisions. The pillow exhales beneath you, not in a comforting way, but more like it resents being involved in this at all. Your limbs start to tingle. Your ears feel bigger. The tapestry on the wall starts whispering in French, and you don't speak French, but the tone is unmistakably gossipy. You close your eyes. Behind them, your brain begins projecting images you never ordered. A choir of badgers, a tax ledger that weeps, the queen riding a giant beetle while reciting poetry about soup. Your heartbeat is playing a rhythm that sounds suspiciously like a tavern jig, and your toes are trying to join in. You open your eyes. The chamber pot is definitely closer now. The king is snoring, peacefully oblivious to the drama that's unfolding inside your bloodstream. A servant is misting his forehead with rose water, while another one brushes his hair with a comb made of ivory and ambition. He's glowing, literally. It's unclear if it's a spiritual thing or just a side effect of the drink. You whisper, "Help," but only the chamber pot hears you. It winks. Eventually the potion thins out in your veins, melting into a soft, fuzzy kind of numbness. The badgers leave. The tapestry goes back to being judgmental in silence. Your muscles release and the bed feels less like a dare and more like a suggestion. You drift, if not into sleep, then into something adjacent to it, a kind of floating. You dream of moths folding laundry. It's the most peace you've had all night. In the morning, the king rises refreshed, sipping mint tea like he hasn't just betrayed every natural law of sleep. He declares the elixir a triumph of modern medicine and nods to Somnalius, who bows with enough flourish to hurt his own back. You're still blinking at the sun with one shoe on and the distinct sensation that your tongue is wearing a hat. Somnalius offers you another goblet. You decline. The chamber pot, which is still watching, seems disappointed. At exactly 2:14 a.m., no bells ring and no horns sound, but something in the air shifts, like the walls themselves just inhaled. It's the hour of the midnight confessor, and the ritual is somehow both sacred and slightly awkward, like spiritual dentistry. The priest arrives silently barefoot with a candle balanced in one hand and a tiny stool in the other. His robes are made of velvet and secrets. You can hear him before you see him, muttering psalms like he's trying to soothe a cat. The king is already semi-upright, his hair tousled like a disgraced cherub, his eyes squinting with the clarity of a man who's lived too long with too many opinions. He gestures for you to leave, but also to stay, and you're too tired to interpret which it is, so you just slide further into your shadow and pretend to be part of the wall. The priest sits down beside the royal bed, crosses one leg over the other, and leans forward like a gossiping aunt with holy credentials. His voice is soft but expectant. The king exhales dramatically.
I once faked a headache to avoid a joust. The priest just nods, as if he hears this sort of thing often. The king continues. It wasn't even a convincing one. I just said ow and fell onto a cushion. They called off the entire tournament and sent me pears. I ate all the pears. I still have the helmet. The priest offers a slow blink of spiritual understanding. I also may have replaced the bishop's wine with watered-down cider during the feast of St. Wibbald. The priest's head tilts, not with judgment, but more like he's mentally tallying how many Hail Marys that's worth, adjusted for ecclesiastical inflation.
The king pulls the covers up to his chin. Sometimes I dream of throwing the crown into a well and running off to become a duck herder. The priest places a hand over his heart and whispers, "We all dream of ducks, your majesty." There is a pause, the kind that grows moss if you leave it too long. Then the priest reaches into his pouch and pulls out a small ceramic flask. "Warm goat milk," he says, "steeped with thyme for the soul." The king accepts it reverently, sips it, and sighs like he's just been forgiven by a dairy product. A smile plays at the edge of his mouth. You are beginning to wonder if confession is less about guilt and more about curated insomnia. The priest leans in again, more curious now. And is there anything heavier? Any burden that gnaws at you like a fox at the pantry door? The king frowns thoughtfully. Sometimes I pretend not to hear my advisors just to see how long they'll keep talking. The priest does not react. And I once told the Queen that her new tapestry was inspired. I did not clarify that I meant it was inspired by confusion. The priest closes his eyes, perhaps to pray, or perhaps to picture the tapestry. "Forgive me, father," the king mumbles, not quite meeting his gaze, "for I am very tired." "Then sleep," the priest whispers, rising. Forgiveness is often found between breaths. He moves to leave, but not before offering one final pearl of nocturnal wisdom. Do not let the goats of shame trample the fields of your dreams. No one knows what that means, but it sounds incredibly wise. At 2:29 a.m., as the priest glides from the room, the candlelight flickering behind him like the tail of a memory, the king sinks back into his pillows with a small, milky smile. You remain very still, unsure whether you're a witness, an accomplice, or simply part of the furniture. The room settles again, and somewhere far below, the chapel goat sneezes. The scandal begins with a whisper, which, like most whispers in the castle, starts in the laundry chamber and ends up in the throne room, passing through at least one pantry, a suspicious-looking broom closet, and the mouth of a footman who knows too much and dusts too little. It's morning, barely. The sky is still wearing its night clothes. You're brushing some ash off your borrowed sleeves when the alarm is sounded, not with bells, but with the loud, flustered exclamation of a chambermaid named Loartha, who storms out of the bedchamber holding what appears to be a mildly insulted blanket. "Flax!" she hisses like it's a curse. "It's flax, not wool, not wool!" The hallway freezes. A cup of barley tea trembles on a tray. A pigeon turns back around. Soon the astrologer is summoned. He arrives in his usual gown of swirling constellations and very real stars, tiny, sharp, and occasionally flammable. He squints at the offending blanket, sniffs it, and announces with great gravity that Mercury has entered a house it has no business being in, and this is clearly the work of sabotage. The bishop mutters something about heresy, the queen mutters about texture, and the cook mutters into a bowl of oatmeal while quietly increasing the butter content. You are invited to inspect the blankets yourself. One is traditional wool, thick, scratchy, and slightly judgmental. The other is flax, smoother, lighter, and suspiciously modern in its vibe. The contrast is stark, like comparing a stern nun to a slightly tipsy aunt. Both are warm, both are well-meaning, but one is clearly plotting something. The king, meanwhile, remains nestled beneath both of them, snoring in the key of minor discontent. He has not yet noticed the change, or, if he has, he's decided not to dignify it with wakefulness. He looks peaceful in that fragile, too-still way that implies either deep sleep or the contemplation of a coup. By noon, the castle is divided. The linen faction, led by the Queen's tailor and 3 bored cousins, argues that flax is breathable, fashionable, and less likely to give one dreams about itchy farm work. The wool loyalists, mostly shepherds, older nobles, and a decorative goat named Bartholomew, stand firm on tradition, comfort, and the sacred obligation to itch nobly in one's sleep. At one point, someone tries to sneak in a velvet throw as a compromise. The Queen gasps. The bishop nearly faints. A servant covers the throw with a pewter plate like it's a scandalous relic. In the middle of it all, the king stirs. He doesn't speak. He merely rolls onto his side, dragging both blankets with him in a sweeping, diplomatic gesture. He sighs, a long, theatrical sigh, tinged with the kind of melancholy only monarchs and poets can pull off at 3 in the afternoon. "I dreamt," he mumbles into the pillow, "that I was a biscuit." The room pauses. "A biscuit?" the astrologer asks cautiously. "A large biscuit," the king confirms. "Warm, crumbly, content." No one knows quite how to respond. The priest mutters a blessing. The cook nods thoughtfully, perhaps making plans. The flax blanket puffs up slightly in pride. Later that evening, a royal decree is issued. It states that the king shall henceforth sleep under both blankets as symbols of unity and balance. And also because choosing is exhausting, the wool is labelled the blanket of tradition, the flax, the blanket of enlightened curiosity. Both are embroidered with the royal crest and a small, smiling biscuit. You pass the Queen in the hallway as she sips wine and glares at a tapestry. "It was definitely fashion," she says without looking at you. You nod, though you're not sure what she means. Back in the bedchamber, the king slumbers, tucked beneath layers of compromise. The wool scratches, the flax whispers. Together they form a truce that rustles softly through the night. Outside, Bartholomew the goat eats a napkin in protest. You see it the very first night, sitting like a forgotten relic on the edge of the royal chaise lounge, slightly puffed and slightly smug, as if it knows something you don't, which frankly, it does. The embroidery is old gold thread in the shape of a lion with one eye closed, as though it's either winking or has just seen too much. Someone's tried to clean it, but the scent clings on stubbornly. Lavender, mildew, and something you can only describe as treasonous. Nobody touches it. They clean around it, like it's a royal ghost. The steward dusts it with a feather that never quite makes contact. The chambermaids avert their eyes when they pass by. The jester, of course, tells you it's cursed. He whispers it with glee like a child sharing a scandal, his eyes wide and dancing. "It swallowed a duke," he says, deadpan, before cartwheeling away with a squeaky horn and absolutely no clarification. Later the steward corrects him. "It did not swallow a duke," he says, folding linen like he's been personally offended. "It merely belonged to one, the last one, the one who fell off the balcony during a mild breeze." He pauses while holding the pillow. You ask if that's a coincidence. He says the wind was unusually opinionated that day. The cat, however, loves the pillow. A round, squishy thing named Montfort, who moves like he owns land and votes. He pads over each night, makes an elaborate show of circling the lion 3 times, then settles in with a sigh that feels louder than the king's declarations of war. No one stops him. Even the bishop steps around him like the feline has some kind of diplomatic immunity. One night, in a moment of questionable courage and definite boredom, you decide to sit next to it. Not on it, you're not unhinged, but close enough to maybe hear it whisper or emit smoke, or demand your soul in exchange for eternal back support. It doesn't do any of that, it just sits there, innocently sinister, like it's waiting for someone to confess. You lean in, It smells older now, somehow more potent, like the memory of a betrayal that still echoes in the stone walls. You think you hear a sigh, or maybe it's just the cat who opens one eye, stares directly into your soul, and flicks his tail like he's making a note of something. You inch away. The king enters moments later, his robe trailing, his crown askew, like a man whose sleep is constantly being interrupted by political obligations and dietary misadventures. He says nothing about the pillow. He never does. He just walks past it, climbs into bed, and begins snoring as if it's a royal decree. You ask the priest about it the next morning over some burnt porridge and a confused-looking egg. He only shakes his head and mutters something in Latin that might be a prayer, or maybe a recipe. Some things, he says, are best left unexplained, like the pillow or the Queen's cousin who speaks only in riddles. You consider moving it just once, just to see what happens. But as you reach for it, Montfort appears. You didn't hear him come in, no footsteps, no creaking floorboard, just a sudden, imperious feline presence. He plants himself right between you and the pillow, slow blinking like an assassin with velvet paws. You retreat. That night, the pillow remains untouched. The lion's embroidered eye seems a little more open now. Or maybe it always was. The cat settles in. The king snores. The wind outside carries the faint echo of a laugh that may or may not be the jester. In the morning, you ask if you can change rooms. The steward simply smiles and hands you a different pillow. This one is embroidered with a goat. You're not sure if it's any safer, but at least it doesn't smell like betrayal. Not yet. There is frost on the king's eyebrows. You try not to stare, but it's hard when they're sparkling like two confused snowflakes trying to unionize. He's swaddled in 12 layers of wool, a bear pelt, and something that might have once been a rug. No one knows why he insists on napping out here. The balcony is narrow, the wind is judgmental, and you're reasonably certain a pigeon just tried to file a noise complaint against the royal snoring. Still, here you are, holding a brass bell with no clapper, because the sound was deemed too stimulating. If the king stops breathing, you're supposed to gently tap it against the stone railing until someone notices. That's the plan. That's the entire plan. The steward calls it a tradition. The queen calls it nonsense. The king calls it invigorating. Right before settling into his frost-covered chaise lounge with the determined optimism of a man who has never personally known hypothermia. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, trying not to freeze solid in your borrowed boots. The fur lining is mostly decorative and seems to be partially inhabited by something that might be alive. You stop wiggling your toes just in case it gets offended. Across the courtyard, a monk is pretending not to watch you. He's technically on candle duty, but his candle hasn't been lit in half an hour, and he's clearly using the flame to toast a chestnut. When you catch his eye, he just shrugs. You nod. It's that kind of day. The king shifts slightly, and a crackling sound rises from beneath him, like a frozen piece of parchment being unfolded. One arm sticks out from the blanket pile, its fingers stiff and noble, pointed directly at the sky as if challenging the clouds to a duel. You consider saluting it. Instead, you tap the bell once for morale. It makes a disappointing little clink. From somewhere inside, someone is playing a lute with the emotional energy of a man who once lost a bet that involved sheep. The sound wafts out the window like a musical sigh. The king does not stir. A droplet of condensation slowly trails from the corner of his mouth and freezes mid-drip. You watch it grow, hypnotized, until it forms what can only be described as a beard icicle. You briefly imagine it winning a small award. The physician arrives, wrapped in so many scarves he looks like an ambitious onion. He kneels beside the king, places 2 fingers against the royal neck, and squints. "Still noble," he says solemnly, then disappears back into the castle without any elaboration. You wonder if this is a normal winter. The wind smells faintly of rosemary and unresolved trauma. A bird lands on the balcony railing, eyes the king, and decides not to engage. It flies off with what might have been a judgmental squawk. You envy its freedom. Eventually, the king sighs a grand, frosty exhale that sends a puff of steam into the air like a tiny storm cloud. His eyelids flutter open. He looks around, blurry but content, as though the freezing of his own nasal passages was a spiritual experience. "Bracing," he whispers to no one in particular. "Deeply bracing." You just nod as if you understand. He stands, or at least he tries to. The layers rebel. It takes 2 footmen, a prayer, and an ill-timed sneeze from the astrologer, but eventually the king is vertical and moving back inside. You follow him, bell in hand, your feet numb, your dignity frozen somewhere between your knees. The steward claps once. Everyone pretends this is all perfectly normal. You hang the bell back on its hook and walk away, hoping for warmth, or at least some tea that doesn't taste like licorice and despair. Next week you'll be back on that balcony and the icicle beard might even have a name. The king begins his wandering just after the 3rd bell, sometime between the astrologer's final chart adjustments and the castle owl's 2nd complaint. The guards don't speak of it openly, but you can see how they grip their spears a little tighter once the moon reaches a certain angle, like they've been warned too many times not to interfere with a man in motion who's dreaming of the 14th century. He doesn't announce his departure. One moment he's snoring beneath 7 layers of ceremonial wool and spiritual doubt, and the next he's upright, barefoot, and gliding across the stone floor like a noble ghost with unresolved cavalry issues. Your job is to follow him. You were told this casually, as if it was just another item between polish the goblets and don't insult the tapestry again. The steward handed you a candle stub and said, "Gently guide him, don't wake him, and definitely don't let him near the poultry." Then he disappeared down a hallway that doesn't exist on any map. So now, here you are, a candle in one hand, a blanket in the other, stalking a king who moves like sleep has divorced itself from time. Tonight he heads east, murmuring names that sound like retired horses or forgotten cheeses. Brindle. Max. Oatmeal. His tone is wistful, like a man recalling lovers that were half horse and half metaphor. You stay a few paces behind, just enough to avoid suspicion. The king doesn't seem to register your presence, though at one point he does pause, tilts his head and whispers, "No, that's not your bucket," to a chair. You nod. It isn't. The castle at night is a different place. The walls seem to breathe. Candles flicker at odd rhythms. Distant snores and murmured prayers bleed through the stone like the echoes of a nap gone sideways. A tapestry sways despite the complete absence of wind. You pretend not to notice. The king passes a guard who stiffens up like he's being knighted by dread itself. The king pats him on the shoulder and mutters, "You did your best, Gregory." The guard's name is Peter. He doesn't correct him. You nudge the king away from a staircase with the same energy you'd use to steer a goat away from a wedding cake. He complies, but not before pausing at the top and declaring, "The battle will be fought with spoons this time." You just bow in agreement. Who are you to argue with sleep logic? The poultry, unfortunately, have noticed him. Chickens in the courtyard are beginning to cluck in a defensive formation. You think you can see the goose, the one that hates everyone, but especially the monarchy, Its eyes narrow as the king approaches. You interject swiftly, positioning yourself between the man and the bird, whispering something that sounds vaguely holy. The goose retreats, but only to regroup. The king turns west now toward the Queen's Tower. This is strictly off limits. You've been warned about this several times. There are even signs. One of them is just a painting of the Queen frowning. You toss the blanket gently over the king's shoulders like a diplomatic offering. He halts and tilts his head. "You smell like porridge," he says, not unkindly. He turns back, heading toward his own chambers with the sleepy dignity of someone who believes he just attended a summit on dream treaties. You follow, your heart still pounding, your candle sputtering like it's losing confidence in your mission. When he reaches his bed, he climbs in without another word. The blanket you gave him stays on, though it's slightly misaligned. He tucks one foot beneath a pillow and exhales so deeply it might qualify as a weather event. Within seconds, the royal snoring resumes, weaving its way through the room like a lullaby played on a broken accordion. You sit beside the door until dawn, watching the hallway for any movement, poultry, or anything else that might try to derail the kingdom's most mysterious midnight routine. The rooster crows somewhere in the distance. A duck laughs. The fire is crackling with the same tired rhythm as your voice. It's your third page of the history of potatoes, and the king is already dabbing at his eyes with the corner of his sleeve like a maiden in a tapestry. You're not sure which part got to him. Maybe it was the paragraph about soil acidity. Maybe it was the footnote about tuber shapes in wet climates. Either way, he's moved, or maybe he's just melting. Possibly both. You didn't expect to be the royal storyteller. In fact, you were just looking for the kitchens when a chamberlain plucked you from obscurity and pressed a book into your hands with a haunted whisper. He prefers slow narratives, he'd said. Nothing too exciting. No twists, nothing involving bears. Then he disappeared down a corridor that didn't exist an hour ago, so now you sit at the foot of the king's bed, your knees tucked under a quilt that smells faintly of time and expectations, your voice echoing through the dim chamber like a librarian's ghost. The king is swaddled in sleep robes that are stitched with embroidered vegetables. There's a beat on the collar and a leak near the elbow. He calls it his comfort harvest. He just nods at you to continue. You clear your throat and begin chapter 4, the expansion of tuber cultivation in fenland marshes, 1211 to 1220. It starts with a long list of farming methods and ends with a surprisingly aggressive anecdote about a monk who hoarded yams. The king sighs softly, his eyes glassy, his expression somewhere between reverence and mild indigestion. You pause to take a sip of lukewarm herbal tea, which tastes like dandelion and disappointment. One of the attendants adjusts your chair by half an inch and nods solemnly. You thank them, not because it helped, but because they clearly needed to do something. The story continues. You read about potato blight, crop rotation, and a local rebellion that was sparked by a poorly planned root festival. The king wipes away another tear. This is the good part, he whispers. You just nod, even though this chapter is mostly about the history of mulch. Behind you, the royal cat paces along the windowsill, its tail twitching with the sort of disdain that's only possessed by animals who have personally witnessed monarchs snore. It stares at you, then at the king, then disappears behind a curtain to go curse your bloodline in private. You reach the climax of tonight's tale. A regional summit in which 5 noblemen argued for 3 days about whether to store potatoes in barrels or baskets. The tension is mild. There's a chart. The king clutches his blanket tighter. He's fully reclined now, the flickering firelight making shadows dance across his face like wistful root vegetables. You lower your voice, adopting a reverent tone as you deliver the final line. and thus concluded the 1220 planting season, with yields surpassing even the estimates of Brother Ulrich, whose charts remain controversial. Silence. You close the book. The king exhales through his nose, one final, trembling breath of starchy satisfaction. "That was exquisite," he murmurs. "The part about the baskets, very moving." You bow, slightly, unsure whether to thank him or to offer him a refund. A servant enters and silently replaces your tea with a bowl of warm broth. You're not supposed to drink it, it's ceremonial. You hold it anyway like a trophy for surviving one of the slowest narratives in recorded history. The king's eyes close. He's not yet asleep, but he's deep in thought, probably about storage methods. You rise to leave. You get a quiet nod from the steward, a rare smile from the guard. Even the cat offers a slow blink of reluctant approval before flicking its tail and vanishing again into the folds of nobility. Tomorrow, someone else will read, possibly from The Evolution of Mud Bricks in Northern Settlements, maybe an incomplete guide to baskets. You don't know, but for tonight, you were the voice that carried a monarch gently into the arms of tuber-induced dreams. And that's not nothing. The bishop declares it with the gravity of a man announcing a flood. No sleep for 2 nights. The king must remain awake, his eyes peeled for divine signs, any prophetic dreams postponed in favor of prolonged blinking and mood swings. It's called sleep fasting, an ancient rite from a scroll that no one has actually seen, translated from a language that may or may not be real. The bishop holds up the parchment like it just bit him. The king just nods solemnly, even as his eyelid begins to tremble. By midnight on the first night, the royal court has the energy of a barn owl with tax problems. The candles burn lower, the shadows lengthen, and everyone is speaking with that syrupy slowness that makes even polite words sound like threats. The king is pacing in circles around the great hall, muttering about the clarity of silence, while his shoe catches on a tapestry and nearly sends him flying into a pewter bowl of jam. You trail behind him, a tea tray in hand, wearing the fixed smile of someone who knows this is not going to end in glory. A musician in the corner is playing one string on a harp every 20 minutes, claiming it helps with temporal awareness. The rest of the room flinches with each note like it's a small slap from God. At hour 9, the king writes a poem about fish. No one asks him to. He just announces it loudly, calls for ink, and scratches it onto the back of a royal decree like it's his magnum opus. It rhymes barely. He stares at it like it contains some kind of universal truth. You read the line, "gills like whispers in a lemon stream," and choose to keep your feedback to yourself. By dawn, the queen is sleeping upright in a chair, a thin string of drool connecting her chin to her collarbone. The bishop is slapping a brass triangle every hour to keep people alert, but mostly it just startles the cat. The jester begins quoting tax codes and laughing hysterically. Someone's wig is on backward. No one mentions it. You offer the king a nap. He squints at you like you're speaking betrayal in fluent heresy. "If I sleep," he whispers, "I might miss the message." You nod. "Understood, but if you don't nap, you might start seeing messages in the curtains." He thinks about that for a moment. You both settle for more tea. It's the spiced kind, brewed with cinnamon bark and desperation. It does nothing. The king's eyes are wide but vacant, the look of a man who's heard too many bells and now thinks only in echoes. By the second night, everyone is unraveling. The steward is walking backward and insists it's for balance. A falconer starts whispering apologies to the chandelier. The bishop maintains that this is all going according to plan, though his eye twitches every time the king recites the fish poem out loud, which he now calls the aquatic gospel. Eventually the king begins seeing things, He points at a bowl of apples and demands that it stop judging him. He weeps at the sight of his own foot. He tries to knight a chair, then forgets why halfway through and scolds it for having poor posture. Still, he refuses to sleep. You begin to suspect the visions aren't divine, just the side effects of a nervous system that's filing complaints. When he tries to eat a candle, you gently redirect his hand and offer him more tea. He accepts it with the gravity of a monarch accepting a surrender. By sunrise of day 3, the bishop declares the ritual complete. No explanation, no vision, just a loud, satisfied declaration and a triumphant exit. The king collapses into a chaise like a puppet whose strings were just cut by someone who was angry at the upholstery. He snores instantly. You sit beside him, sipping cold tea, watching a beam of light crawl across the tiles like it's seen things it will never speak of. Someone begins reading the fish poem aloud again. You pretend not to hear. The tapestry doesn't so much move as it just exhales. A little puff of old dust, the scent of lavender, and long-forgotten decisions. You brush it aside, thinking you'll find a wall, or maybe just a draft. Instead, your fingers find wood, then a handle. Then, almost without your permission, the wall opens, not loudly, just enough to feel personal. Inside is a room the size of a confession, small, hushed, and clearly not on any official diagram. There's a cot, a single thin blanket that smells faintly of cinnamon and rebellion, a stubby candle that's burned halfway down like it got bored midway through illumination, and an orange, split in half, sitting delicately on a pewter plate like a peace offering between two very tired factions. On the wall, scrolled in chalk right above the cot's headboard, are 5 words. Do not tell the bishop. They're underlined twice. The second underline just sort of trails off like the chalk got nervous. You freeze in that soft and crumbling kind of silence that only ever exists in secret places. There's a hum to the room, not of sound but of agreement. This is not a room that was built for declarations or rituals or scrolls. It's a place of surrender, a little corner of human need, carved into the stone and hidden behind the grand noise of all the courtly things. You glance behind you, but no one has followed. You shut the tapestry again, gently, as though the wall might change its mind. Then you sit down on the cot. It creaks the way only honest furniture does, a sound that says, "Yes, yes, I've held many." The blanket is scratchy, but it's familiar. The kind of wool that once hugged a sheep with political opinions. It has a weight to it, which feels strangely like kindness. You pick up the orange, it's cool, freshly peeled. Someone had planned to eat it, but got distracted. Or maybe they meant for you to find it. Either way, you eat it in silence, tasting citrus and secrecy. There are no windows, no bells, no bishop, just you, the cot, and the memory of someone very royal needing a nap badly enough to hide from an entire castle just to get one. It occurs to you, slowly, that the king must have used this room more than once. The chalk is smudged. There are indentations on the cot that are not shaped like you. The candle is shorter than it should be for something that's been left untouched. There's a teacup in the corner with a chip that's shaped exactly like the kingdom's northern border. You lie back. The mattress isn't soft, but it also doesn't poke you with coins or pamphlets. There are no servants fanning you with poultry, no astrologers humming their approval, no whispered updates from the hallway. Just stillness. A stillness that has its elbows on the table and its feet tucked under a quilt. And just as your eyes begin to flutter shut, you hear it. A voice, soft, familiar, raspy with authority and sleep. "I never told anyone either," says the king. He's standing in the corner, holding the second half of the orange and wearing what can only be described as a robe of tactical avoidance. He looks at the cot like it's a chapel. Then he sits on the floor, cross-legged, like a child who's hiding from his homework. "This room," he whispers, "is older than my title." You don't ask any questions. You just nod, your mouth full of citrus, your mind full of fog. The two of you sit there in silence. No declarations, no ceremony, just a candle, a cot, and the quiet understanding between two people who have both, at some point, needed to disappear for a little while. The king is ill and the castle has begun to unravel. Not dramatically, no flaming tapestries or hastily written wills, but in a slow, passive-aggressive way. The kind of unraveling that begins with silence and ends with someone crying in a pantry. The halls are quieter now, except for the muffled tectonic snores that are emanating from the royal bedchamber. It sounds less like a man sleeping and more like a series of avalanches that are politely taking turns. You're handed a mop with no instruction other than a condescending glance from a chambermaid named Zibble, who mouths something that might be Godspeed, or it might be he bit me. You're not sure which is worse. Inside the room, the air is dense with the scent of boiled herbs and existential fatigue. Candles are flickering in the corners like they're reconsidering their employment. A bowl of something that was once medicinal is festering on a stool. It may have been soup. It now looks like it resents you. The king is lying in bed, half buried beneath an impressive mound of fur blankets, his nose red enough to qualify for sainthood, his snores pausing only to allow for phlegmatic declarations of injustice and doom. At one point he mutters something about a treaty and sneezes hard enough to shift the drapes. The jester is here too. He's wearing a hat that seems louder than necessary and is moving around the room, waving a bundle of sage like he's conducting an exorcism that keeps changing its mind. He doesn't speak, just hums a note that may or may not be Greensleeves and glares meaningfully at the corners of the room, as if the illness itself might be lurking behind the wainscoting. You begin mopping, or at least pretending to. The floor is mostly dry, but the mop gives you something to hold, something to aim your thoughts into. You wonder what life choices you made that led to you being a royal illness buffer. You also wonder if the jester has any idea what he's doing or if he's just stalling for applause. The king coughs, not delicately. It's the kind of cough that makes birds startle 3 counties over. A basin is thrust into your hands by someone you didn't see arrive and won't see leave. You hold it with the grim reverence of someone who's catching rainwater in a teacup during a flood. At some point the physician enters. He smells faintly of vinegar and crushed hope and declares the king is suffering from an imbalance of winds. You're not entirely sure what that means, but it sounds like something you'd apologize for after a feast. The physician offers a syrup that's made from garlic, honey, and something he won't name. The king throws it at a wall without opening his eyes. Later, the bishop visits. He blesses the pillows, all of them, one by one, then he prays over the mop, just in case. You try not to make eye contact. He whispers that sickness is a test of the soul. You wonder why your soul is being tested by a puddle of someone else's sneeze. The queen doesn't enter. She just sends a note that simply reads, "Again?" and a second one that says, "Tell him I'm in the East Tower until further notice." It smells faintly of rosewater and detachment. Night falls, though the room remains unchanged. The snores grow louder, deeper, more philosophical. The jester is now asleep on a stool, clutching his sage like a teddy bear. You just sit on the floor, the mop beside you, and listen to the rhythm of a monarchy that's feeling slightly unwell. Somewhere in the corner, a frog croaks. You don't remember letting in a frog, but no one else reacts, so you pretend not to hear it. And as the fire crackles and the king wheezes something about grain tariffs, You close your eyes just for a moment. The sickness isn't yours, but somehow you're a part of it. Part of the room, part of the care, part of the strange ballet of comfort and chaos. You breathe in the scent of sage and soup and candle wax, and you begin to hum along with the jester's forgotten tune. The summons comes at dusk, wrapped in velvet and mystery, handed to you by a boy with a candle and a suspicious-looking moustache. He says nothing, just gestures with the solemnity of someone who's delivering a prophecy, or maybe just bad soup. You follow him through the south wing, past the room where nobody ever makes eye contact, and around the hallway that always smells faintly of jam. Tonight is the final sleep. Once a month, the king's entire schedule bends like a reed in the wind, except the reed is embroidered and the wind has a title. Everything is rearranged. Meetings are cancelled, trumpets are silenced. A goose that normally greets him in the morning is politely asked to stand down. This is not an ordinary sleep. This is ceremony. This is legend. This is a performance with one audience member and 20 witnesses, and somehow you're one of both. In the preparation chamber, he is being wrapped, not tucked in, but wrapped, in layers of silk, lavender, and something that's referred to only as ancestral thread. You're not sure what that means, but it looks expensive and mildly itchy. A steward is brushing the king's eyebrows, another one is polishing his slippers, even though he's not wearing them. He's eating plums, slowly, like each one is a confession. The juice glistens on his chin. No one wipes it away. The Queen sends a short note. "Don't wake him, not again." It's underlined twice. Before the sleep, the king recites a poem to his own reflection. It's about rivers and loyalty, although a stanza or two could be about soup. The mirror says nothing, which is apparently a good sign. He bows to it once with dramatic flair, then turns to you and says, "Write this down," before promptly forgetting what he was about to say. You do not write anything down. A monk steps forward to hum. That's his entire job. Humming. A single tone, vaguely in key, that's meant to guide the king's spirit into sleep like a foghorn in a night made of velvet. A falconer tosses feathers in the air. No one asks why. Then comes the placement. The royal bed has been remade 6 times. You watched. The first time was too crisp, the second was too casual. The third time had a lump that was described as emotionally jarring. Now it just looks perfect, like a nap that was written by a poet who's never actually been tired. The mattress sighs as the king climbs in. Not metaphorically, it actually makes a noise. Someone apologizes to it. You are handed a quill and a piece of parchment and told to document anything unusual. You ask what qualifies as unusual. The steward replies, a wink from the void, a prophecy written in crumbs, or if he snores the tune of the national anthem again. You nod as if that answers everything. The candles are dimmed to a royal twilight. The humming fades away. The king exhales a long breath that seems to carry the weight of minor treaties and one unresolved chess match. He sinks into the bed like a jewel being returned to its velvet box. His crown is removed, not with reverence, but with care, as if it might bite. Then nothing. For 14 hours, he will not speak, will not rise, will not demand a radish or throw a spoon at a tapestry. His sleep is not restless, it is complete, a sleep that requires an audience and a title, a sleep so grand it has footnotes. You sit in the corner, scribbling things that sound important. Twitch at 2:14, whispers, possibly Latin, possibly about pudding. You eat the rest of the plums when no one's looking. At hour 7, the cat arrives. It curls up beside the bed like it has jurisdiction. At hour 9, the jester peeks in and then immediately leaves. Even he knows this is sacred. At hour 12, The bishop sneezes in the hallway and is exiled for the rest of the evening. You, however, remain. You watch the king sleep under more fabric than most small nations could afford, and you wonder if this is enlightenment or just very fancy camping. You consider starting a journal. You start to nod off, but you catch yourself. The parchment flutters. The king shifts, sighs, and smiles. No one claps, but they want to. The bed is quiet. Too quiet. It's not just an absence of sound, but a vacancy of everything. No creaks from embroidered headboards, no distant humming, no subtle waft of thyme and vaguely medicinal herbs. The royal linens are neatly folded at the foot of the bed like a forgotten truce. The mattress holds no imprint of a monarch or a memory. You reach out just to confirm its emptiness, as if the king might have learned how to be invisible in the night, or been folded into the bedding like a dignified towel. No one's there. You sit up slowly, your joints surprised. The air tastes like morning, but an unbothered one. No bells, no chanting, no frantic shuffle of slippers across the stone, no servants, no priest tucking his notes into his sleeves, no jester pretending to be a potted plant for reasons no one had the energy to question. Even the cat is gone, which is unsettling because the cat has never willingly missed a nap or a scandal. You check the window, expecting to see at least a trumpet or an argument. Nothing. Just the sun, polite and golden, draping itself over the garden like it paid rent. You rub your eyes. Maybe you dreamt the whole thing. Maybe you're in a different castle. Maybe this is a trap, cleverly disguised as breakfast, but the silence holds. It's not ominous, not grand, just unfinished. You find your shoes by the door when no one has ever left them so neatly before. Someone has done you a kindness. This unsettles you more than betrayal would. You step into them, half expecting alarms to blare. None do. You open the door. Still nothing. The hallways echo gently as you walk. The tapestries don't whisper. The chandeliers don't tremble. The suits of armor don't blink. You pass the bishop's office. It's empty, save for a half-eaten pear and a note that simply reads, Tuesday, as if even time has given up on specifics. You keep walking. In the courtyard, the cobblestones are warm. The pigeons have reclaimed their authority. They waddle around like they're officials. And there, beneath the only tree that dares to grow in the shadow of all those royal routines, is the king sitting. No throne, no velvet, no fanfare. Just a bench, just a man in loose robes holding a small spoon and a very tired-looking plum. He sees you, and he smiles. Not the formal smile of decrees and portraits, but the other kind. The one that feels like finishing a sentence you didn't even realize you were writing. You've learned, he says, with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't. You open your mouth to respond, but you stop because you haven't. Not in the way that makes sense with facts and timelines and solid explanations, but something in your shoulders has loosened. Something in your breath feels less borrowed. Something in you knows what time it is without having to ask the stars or the cook. So you just nod, not because you know, but because it feels like the right thing to do. The king gestures toward the plum, offering it like a relic. You decline. He shrugs and eats it whole. You turn. You walk back through the halls, which now feel neither royal nor haunted, just halls. You pass your old cot, the one that always squeaked and smelled faintly of soap and ambition. You pass the tapestry that once hid secrets and now only hides dust. Your bed is waiting for you, not the king's, not the taster's, but yours. It's lumpy in a familiar way, and slightly crooked from too many uncertain nights. You climb in. No trumpets, no ceremony. You sleep. And this time, no one watches.